Good afternoon, everyone. Welcome to the Urban Platform. Today we have our guest of honor, Dr. Craig Townsend. How are you doing?
Fine, thank you.
Sir, I'll just give a quick introduction of you. Dr. Craig Townsend, Associate Professor, Chair of the Geography, Planning and Environment Department. Welcome to the Urban Platform. Sir, I have to say this was one episode we weren't only looking forward to, but all the students were excited for this one. It'll give us an opportunity for us to know you a bit better. So I sort of want to set the tone for the program. We essentially will start off with some casual questions for you. I know Aaron, before we start that, Aaron would want to share a story of our experiences with you in first year, what we felt about it, what we thought of it. So we're going to give Aaron and Anne-Marie an opportunity to say anything they need to say, and I'll come in between if I feel like I need to add anything. So Aaron, Anne-Marie, go ahead.
I'm starting with the story. Okay.
Yeah.
A couple of years ago, so 3-4 years ago now, I went to Concordia's open house, and I had no clue what urban planning was all about. And I met Craig, and he introduced what planning was, and I thought, you know what, I'm going to give it a shot, see what happens. And 4 years later, after that conversation, I'm now loving urban planning, and I'm thinking about going on to do a master's in the field. So it was thanks to that one conversation where I'm like, I didn't really know anything about urban planning before, but it seemed really cool. And Craig is one of the reasons why. And another thing that helped was in June 2017, Mo? 2018?
It was 2018.
Okay. So in June 2018, Mo and I both attended the orientation session within the department. And we didn't know each other at the time, and we went into it not knowing each other. And you had given us the advice to go get your student IDs done today before waiting until August. So we went in June, we met each other in student services and became best of friends after that moment. So thanks to you for that.
Okay, I'm happy to hear this story. I'm enthusiastic about urban planning, so it's good that I am encouraging really motivated and enthusiastic students like yourselves to join our program.
And Anne-Marie, do you have any moments you want to share about the program or your experiences so far with it?
Well, I did have some sort of similar story. I went to the meeting for the department for new students. And I remember when I was in that room, we were only like 4 or 5 students, I think. And all the other students were human environment, and it was this human environment teacher speaking, explaining like different things about registering and stuff. And then in walks in Dr. Townsend, and he talks about urban planning, and he leaves, and I just felt reassured, about my place in the program and what I was going to study. So, yeah.
Oh, thank you. Thank you. I appreciate it.
And I think I'll just share one small part about my experience was when Herbs 230 began. I remember Aaron, right on the first day, I messaged him. I'm like, hey, are you around? Because I remember meeting him from orientation. And ever since that day, Herbs 230, our first class, that sort of set the tone for me and towards the program. That's where I met some of my closest friends. And we had a great experience in that class, sir. So we just wanted to give you a shout out and appreciation for being very welcoming and being very approachable and setting a great tone for the program.
Oh, thank you. Yeah, one thing I miss now that I'm in this administrative position as chair of the department, one thing I miss is the undergrad advising role that I've had to give up as a result, and also teaching Herbs 230. And this job is difficult at times, and I think I would just love to be back in Herbs 230 or doing the new student orientation. So I have fond memories of it as well, and I hope to get back to it one day.
Yes, sir. And we will move on to the next segment, the casual questions. So, sir, our first question, how's your cat? Do you have any other animals?
No, just one cat, and yeah, she's doing really well. Although we have a mice problem in my building and an ant problem. It doesn't seem too extreme, but an exterminator came yesterday and the cat was freaked out. She must have sensed that there was some danger being introduced into the house. But other than that, the cat's great. But no other animals.
Great to hear. And our second question, what's your favorite place to travel? any place.
Yeah, I love travel, and like everyone right now, I miss travel. And I am actually reminded by Facebook today that 1 year ago today, I was in Bryce Canyon in Utah. Hope I got that right. And
think
during
so.
the last March break, my wife and I flew to Las Vegas, and then we did a tour of the Grand Canyon, Bryce Canyon, and Zion National Park. And it was a fantastic time. And so one place I want to get back is there, but I also love cities, and I usually try to get to New York City once every couple of years. And I'm missing New York City. And I would ideally like to go to some cities in Southeast Asia again sometime soon.
Awesome. And
I'm missing New York too. Want to go see a Broadway show.
and we had a very big concern when we were speaking amongst us three before this interview, sir, is how are the plants in studio doing? I remember Aaron and Anne Marie telling me how you would actually go water the plants once in a while on studio. I'm not sure of the rate, but are you sort of keeping track of them? Are you taking care of them?
Yep. I'm the unofficial gardener in the department. Someone once called me the plant whisperer. And, I've been taking care of those plants in the urban planning studio. I think we started putting them in there about 10 years ago. So I've been looking after, they've come and gone. Some did not make it through the move in there, or the conditions weren't quite right, but yeah, I've been taking care of them. But actually there are no plants in the planning studio now, because the planning studio was emptied out a few weeks ago. And there is now a faculty of arts and science has temporarily moved in a computer lab with 40 computer spaces in there. So I removed the plants and I put them 2 doors down at the geology, what we call the geology lab, just down the hall. So they're actually in there now. And now there's a computer lab in there temporarily.
I thought some of them were like scattered around your office too, in back.
Yeah, there's some behind me. I think you can see a couple here.
Yeah.
And there was some movement around the department, but I'm actually looking after some of my colleagues' plants as well. So some of my colleagues have not been in maybe once in the last year to their office. So I'm tending their plants as well.
Thank you. And
So
I know
you really
that
are the gardener.
and I know that we're responsible for bringing in some of the plants every year in studio when we do a charrette or when we do like a place building activity. Last year we did one in the floor space, and we were asked to bring plants, and at one point we just brought them back up to studio. So if you were wondering why there was more plants one day, that's probably on us people in studio who bring them once a year or so.
Huh. Well, I have noticed over the years, sometimes other plants do end up in there, and it happens regularly. So I don't know who it is, if it's my colleagues or students, that people put other plants in there. And I also move around plants, so some people get perplexed sometimes. I moved someone else started watering plants in our common area by the main office here, and actually they were being overwatered for the last few months. So then I tried to save some that were being overwatered and bring them into my office or into the planning studio and then into the geology lab in order to not overwater them. But so yeah, they move around.
Did you criticize his watering skills, sir?
No, they're just being loved to death. I think people
Okay,
like,
yeah, no, it's a bit
having
overbearing.
plants in the office space. So yeah, I didn't want to discourage someone from doing something that was bringing them happiness. And it's hard to know, by the way. Sometimes I'm not sure if I'm underwatering or overwatering occasionally with some plants. And my wife and I at home get into big arguments about, she feels I'm overwatering sometimes, and then I criticize her for underwatering. So it's an art rather than a science.
Well, thank you for being the unofficial plant whisperer of the department.
We
greenery helps us as students, like when we were physically there, seeing those plants at night or like having you come in to water them made our day.
Okay. Yeah, I like it too. It relaxes me a bit. It gives me something that can be done in a short period of time that takes my mind off other stressful or difficult things, and it's relatively easy to water plants, but you
In
can
a way,
overwater them.
it's therapeutic in a way, I would say.
Yeah, it's therapeutic.
Of
I
course.
agree.
Yeah. Now, I think Aaron asked this question. So, any new pictures taken from transportation? I have been using your advice to take pictures from planes, and it has been successful.
Wasn't me, it was
Okay.
Anne-Marie.
Oh, that
It was
was
Anne-Marie,
me,
okay.
actually.
Okay.
Yeah, I remember you telling me about this before, Anne-Marie. Yeah, I'm happy you've started doing that. Yeah, it's fun, and you never know. Sometimes you take pictures and then you're making a presentation one day and you realize you need a picture of something, and if you have that, it's great. It helps out.
Yeah, ever since you showed us how to take pictures, I've been trying to plan my seats in airplanes, well,
Yeah, yeah,
not in this last year, but
yeah, yeah. No, the location of your seat makes a big difference.
it really does. Yeah.
And since you've
Now,
told us that, I've taken more attention to flight routes in Montreal specifically. So like I often find myself, especially in the summer, going to Parc Jacques de Sep, like right next to the airport. So I watch where they come in from, and I'm like, that's the route. Okay, so next time on a plane, if I want to see this angle, they're going to be landing this. And then I look at the wind conditions too, and I'm like, okay, it's based on the wind that it lands this way.
That's funny because I do that by looking at a map. So let's say I'm gonna take a plane and I just go like, okay, let's say going from Montreal and going to, let's say, that city, and then I just try to calculate which side I should be on.
Yeah, you guys seem like you're doing as much, if not more, than I do in figuring this out. There's a degree of chance to it, but sometimes you get really lucky. The last time I was in New York, I was really lucky. We took off from LaGuardia Airport, which is closer to Manhattan than JFK or Newark Liberty. And yeah, it was just perfect. And I had no way of predicting it, but it was just perfect. The sky was beautiful blue, and it took off, and I was totally in the right seat. I'm, yeah, it was just, well, it's chance. So there's a degree of good luck to it.
It's an art though, but it's a fun art.
Yeah, it's fun to do.
and sir, when you were a student, what was your favorite class?
Um, in my undergrad, there were a few like key classes. I enjoyed most of my classes, but there were a few key classes that really, well, I didn't know what I was doing when I started out as an undergrad. And I took an introduction to anthropology and sociology. And I was fascinated in particular by the anthropology part, which was about studying other cultures. And I remember that really fascinated me, and I was really excited about that class. And I actually took the UBC equivalent of URBS 230, which I've taught many, many times. It's called URST 200 at UBC, and it's still running. And
Awesome.
I took it long ago, and that was the first I had heard of about like big cities, and and that was a memorable class for me. So those were a couple of my favorite classes, but I can think of others as well. But those were two key ones that actually had like a decisive impact on what I studied, because I decided to do a major in anthropology for my undergrad, and then doing the URST 200 later on in my undergrad as an elective. That was part of a series of events that led me to doing a master's degree in urban planning.
That's amazing. So it just took one class to change the route of where you ended up being.
Yeah, and sounds maybe like you've had similar experiences where
Yes,
just
sir.
like in a short period of time in one class or an information session or something, there's like a series of chances,
Yeah.
and they can have like a life-altering impact where it influences many events in your life that come subsequently.
I fully back that up, and I think each of us here have had those moments where we would sometimes contemplate whether we were actually in the right program, but then as we went on, or at least for myself as I went on, that's when I fully understood that this was the program that I wanted to be in, and this is the type of career path that I'd want to pursue. Since it's very interdisciplinary, this program, it goes into branches off to so many different things. That's one of the biggest reasons that I love it. And now, sir, this is a two-part question, and this is a fun one. What's one thing that students would be dying to know about you? Maybe your favorite meal, side hobby. So let's start with the first one. What is one fact or one thing about you that students should know, or something cool, something that will
I
be
can
like,
start
wow, I
with
didn't
one
know
if
this.
that helps. I'll say this because my grandfather listens to the podcast. My grandfather broke my arm. I was on a monkey bar, and he put me on the higher monkey bar, and I was scared of heights, and my arm went like this, and I broke my arm in Florida, so that wasn't fun. But if that helps, set the tone.
So what would be something? Well, one thing is that I've lived on 3 continents in my adult life. So
That's
that
North
was one thing.
America, Asia, and what's the third one?
Australia, if you consider it a continent, which most
I do.
people do.
Marie, you want to take a dig on this question?
Sure.
One thing that
So
we
another thing. What about your favorite food?
Oh, my favorite food. It's going to sound really boring. It's probably hamburgers.
Me too. Can't go wrong with one.
Yeah. Anne-Marie, do you want to answer this question as well? Do you want to tell us something about yourself?
Yeah, definitely. I guess one thing about myself could be that I broke both my pinky fingers in the span of 5 months when I was in high school. So one hand it was playing volleyball, and the other hand was babysitting. And the little guy was trying to show me his karate move, and I broke both of my pinkies. It was very fun to write. Interesting experience.
That is really unusual that you would have broken the same finger or on both hands in a short
On both
period of time.
hands, yeah.
Were you still in a cast for both of them?
So I didn't have a cast.
Okay, or a
actually.
splint?
I had some sort of plastic thing to held my hands. So I'm a lefty, and the left hand was during final exams in high school. So I was lots of trouble writing, and then the other hand was during the summer, so I was fine.
Awesome. I guess to quickly answer the question, I love breakdancing, and the second thing I would say is I love doing handiwork around the house if something's broken. I mean, my dad would always try and fix it and maybe break it even more. So
I'm fascinated by breakdancing. I didn't know you breakdance.
yeah, I didn't obviously have an opportunity to present it during university, but yeah, that's just a side thing. Okay, moving on.
Well, breakdancing is very kind of an urban art form.
Actually, yeah, I didn't
True,
think about it
yeah.
that way. Well, I
You
think we
can
need to
do it
set
in
up a
the
program
streets.
now.
Yep.
Perfect. Okay. Now, what's one word of advice? We're getting a little deep here, sir. What's one word of advice you can give to your former self as a student when you were younger, or maybe even just recently? What would you have told yourself?
Yeah, I probably would have told myself to be more outgoing and meet more people, particularly while you're younger. It's easier to meet more people and make more friendships. And I'm a little bit reserved, and I would have, if I could go back, I would have been more outgoing. And this is maybe the academic in me, but I probably would have studied harder. I wasn't a very serious student my first few years, and it's easier to learn things when you're younger. And I wish that I had learned some skills that I don't have or that I lack at the moment for my research and other purposes.
It's not too late
Awesome.
to learn a new skill.
No, it's never too late, but also as you go on, you become really good at doing certain things. So it's, in some sense, it's better just to do the thing that you're really good at some point, rather than trying to learn something new. one thing I'm thinking of is stats. I really should have, and also I skipped intro to calculus in like grade 12 math, and I felt like that like disadvantaged me later on, and then I had a little bit of difficulty with intro to stats at university, and then I never learned the higher level of statistical analysis. So if I could go back, I would have done that higher level math in grade 12, and then done more stats in university as an undergrad and later on. I felt like that would have helped me out more. But oh well, you can't turn back the clock. But those are two things: be more outgoing, study more stats.
Awesome.
You can
And I
never
think
study enough stats. One of my old profs actually told me he did 7 stats classes over the course of his undergrad degree alone. And even to this day, he's like, I still don't know enough about stats. There's so much more to learn. And I'm like, you took 7 classes. How do you need more? And he's like, I don't know ANOVA. And I'm like, I don't know that either.
Yeah, I guess there is never enough. As you go on, you realize how little you know. The more you learn, in a sense, you realize how much more there was you could have learned. And by the way, also being more outgoing and studying more stats is a bit of a contradiction there, because to be more outgoing, I would have spent less time studying probably. And I'm also saying I would have spent more time studying. So maybe that's not realistic.
yeah, and I guess just to the viewers out there who will be watching this podcast, take what Dr. Townsend said, like just try to apply it to your life in any way. If you have any regrets or you have any, like you want to dwell in other activities, don't be intimidated to do anything you'd want to learn. Have no fear. Just go ahead and just get to it. And going on to our next question, sir. Now we're slowly going towards the end of the casual questions portion of the podcast. So what got you into the realm of transportation planning?
Well, the story I usually tell is that when I was kind of a young teenager, I got into comic books, and I was interested in picking up imported comic books, or hard to find comic books that you couldn't find at the local store in the suburb where I lived. And I kept bugging my mom to take me to downtown Vancouver, where there were specialty comic book stores.
Cool.
And she got sick of my requests, and at some point she picked up a bus schedule and just said, you figure out the bus schedule and get there yourself. And so when I was I think that was when I was 13 or 14, I started taking the bus on my own to the comic book shops and in downtown Vancouver, and that kind of opened my eyes to public transportation and to seeing the city through the window of the bus. So if you really want to go back far, I would say that's where I could trace my interest in urban transportation too. But on a later on, I think it came out actually when I was a master's of planning student. So when I was a master's of planning student, we had to do a master's degree project. It wasn't quite at the level of a full thesis, which is more like a 100-page research paper. Most master's of planning programs are course-based, and then they usually just have some small research project, and you write a report, and that's usually more in the order of like 50 pages. And for that master's degree project, I was looking around for topics, and I started out on a couple of other topics, and then some things led me to considering an urban transport related project, and that's what I did. And I knew as soon as I started doing that this was the right thing, and this was really what I was interested in. But it only happened about in my second year in grad school that realization occurred, and that's kind of what set me along the path to studying urban transportation.
It's really cool. And question on the comic books, because I'm a Marvel fan too. Well, not a comic book fan. So what's your favorite comic book?
I was into the X-Men. I
Can't
was
go wrong with
Yeah,
that.
very cool.
There were some alternative comic books that I got interested in. Like there's one called Cerebus. I don't know how to pronounce it. And there were a bunch of Marvel ones. some short-lived series that didn't go on very far, but I would say the X-Men, there was one called The New Mutants, which was an X-Men spin-off,
Cool.
and at one point Spider-Man, at one point Batman, and then was near the end of my comic book interest, or that the Batman movies started to come out, and that kind of tied in with the beginning of the movie phase of the comic book history. But those were some, yeah, those were some that I kind of remember. I still, by the way, have a small comic book collection in my parents' basement, of like individually bagged comic books that I'm hoping are worth a huge amount of money, but I doubt it. But you never know.
Never
You never
know.
know. Yeah.
That's what I'm hoping
Um,
for with my figurine. I have this Iron Man, this Iron Man figurine. I'm hoping that one day it'll be
Beautiful.
worth something.
I
Hey,
had
if
some,
you leave it in your parents' basement,
It is in my parents' basement.
yeah. If enough time passes and someone has an interest in it, it becomes worth something.
Yeah.
But it's hard to know actually. I once looked at my comic books and then just started searching online, and a lot of them were worth virtually nothing. And then unpredictably, the odd one here or there was actually worth nothing. Nothing that substantial though.
Like you
and
have to take it to a special store and get it evaluated. It's a whole
Yeah.
process.
Yeah.
And it's funny because what I heard about comic books and how the value sort of how whether the value can be high or low is based on what's happening currently with that story or that character. If it's
Sure.
being widely spoken about, then you can expect those comic books or those specific comic books to rise in value. And I guess, sir, that goes on to my second part of the question. So are you into Marvel movies? Are you into any superhero movies, whether it be DC or Marvel?
Not really, actually. I never really appreciated the movies that much. Maybe some of the first Batman ones, and I've watched some of the DC and some of the Marvel movies. But no, I haven't really gotten into them.
Cool. And now on to our next question. So what topics are you currently looking at right now
In terms of my research,
in terms of your research? Yeah.
yeah, the main things I'm interested in, or that I'm working on papers on right now, are there was a period in which an urban transport policy called bus rapid transit, or a type of urban transport infrastructure called bus rapid transit, became really popular in the developing world. And I'm interested in particular, in the role that international institutions played in encouraging that growth in popularity of that, and particularly in the World Bank, which is a big financial institution based in
Yeah.
Washington, D.C. And I'm interested in the role of that institution. So I've got a paper I've been working on for a long time on that topic underway. And then more recently, I'm interested in also uh, the form that new suburbs in Canada are taking.
Mhm.
And I had a student, one of your colleagues, last summer, working over the summer remotely on basically measuring the density of new suburbia, or suburbia built during different periods of time in Canada's 4 largest metropolitan areas by area. And interestingly, the newer built suburbs, or the newer subdivisions or neighborhoods composed mainly of single family homes, are actually a bit denser than those neighborhoods of mainly single family homes built up like during the 60s, 70s, and 80s. So I'm interested in pursuing an investigation into like how different regulations, like to do with zoning, road engineering, development charges, and some other factors, the role that some of those things have played in encouraging this kind of slightly denser form of uh, suburbia. So those are two main topics at the moment. I've got a few others, but those are the two things that are kind of on the front burner that I'm occasionally writing notes about and trying to write something about.
Pretty cool
interesting.
topics.
Awesome. And so this will be our last question. to end the casual questions portion of the podcast. So when it comes to transit-oriented development, what's the first project that comes to mind?
If it's in Canada, I mean, I usually think of Metrotown in Vancouver as a transit-oriented development project. But I am someone that believes that transit-oriented development exists in many different forms in different metropolitan areas. So actually, like a lot of, say, Tokyo is actually transit-oriented development. It's buildings that were put up around the urban rail and suburban rail systems of Tokyo, and that have evolved over time. In the North American context, it usually refers to like some more contained development that is has some special designation as a transit-oriented development zone and is located on map and is indicated on maps, usually with like a circle or some area that delineates the area that's contained within that specially designated zone. So when I think of transit-oriented development, I think of the places that I know that fit that definition. And I would say within Canada, it's Metrotown or some of the other new suburban centers, including around Coquitlam Center in Greater Vancouver. But then when I think globally about it, I think about like Tokyo, which I've had the chance to visit a couple of years ago. And to me, that was kind of the embodiment of transit-oriented development.
It's interesting because Anne Marie and I were talking about this before the podcast. When it comes to TODs and transit-oriented development, the first one that comes to our mind is in the Canadian context because it's what we're familiar with. It's the Triangle Project in TMR. And it was funny that we both had the same one.
And I think Bonaventure came out to my mind when we were discussing that. So very, very, very different. And it's obviously based on personal experiences.
Yeah.
And yeah, sir. So thank you for all the answers to the casual questions. Now we're moving on to our second portion of the podcast, which will be the more formal end, and we will try to we will ask you some questions regarding the REM. So try answering them to the best of your ability. So just for the viewers out there, before we begin, the REM is a light metro and transit system which is currently under construction in the Greater Montreal area around Montreal, Quebec, Canada. This system will link several suburbs with downtown Montreal via Central Station. And we have questions for you regarding the project, sir. So first question, how do you obtain your information about the REM?
Mainly through the English language press in Montreal, so mainly through the Montreal Gazette reporting, and also through the REM website. And then I have talked to some people involved in the government, or I've talked to other researchers who talked to those people. And also in the early phase, there were some activists opposed to the REM for various reasons. And some of them had provided like written critiques of the REM. So I had received some of that. And I heard a presentation from the ARTM, the chief planner there. I think it's Daniel Bergeron, and he was presenting on the ARTM and their planning process and the REM. So those are the main sources of information.
Yeah, we wanted to ask the question because for students out there, they're always like, where do we get all this information? And I agree, like Montreal, because that's a great starting point because a lot of students are like, I found this on Montreal blog, and I'm like, don't necessarily trust Montreal blog, but that's another story.
And in French, I think there's been a lot of reporting in La Presse on the REM project. At one point, I did search for opinion columns, and there was actually proportionately more in La Presse than in the Montreal Gazette. I had found like 8 opinion columns on it.
And when we used to go to school in person every day, if I grabbed the Journal Metro or the Journal, Metro Journal, I always found one page that was devoted to the REM or devoted to planning more generally. And I'm like, oh, it's pretty neat that there's a page of it every day.
Yeah, I mean, it's in the news a lot. And it's fascinating. And this REM project it's a huge project.
And so regarding the students, and I think the viewers would be very interested in knowing, um, now as undergrad students, or even I would say even master's students, right? Now, the typical source to find information is through the media, through research. Now, would you encourage students to go out to probably government officials or try to make phone calls or try to go into government offices to ask questions? Or do you think that there would be no benefit or use to doing that just because they're students, they're not seen as credible people to speak to for some? So would you encourage that type of information seeking, or would you just say stick to the resources that we have that are more easily accessible?
Yeah, I mean, contacting planners or government
Mhm.
officials on something, they're often so busy and they're contacted by so many people from the general public that they're probably not going to respond to your requests for information unless it's occasionally you get to the right person or someone who has time, um, and they will answer your email. But it, it's it's difficult at times to get responses. And
Of
these
course.
big projects usually have some kind of PR office. And like the REM project has, they have email newsletter once a week. So I've signed up for that. And then they have information sessions occasionally. Like there was one, I told my class about it last week or the week before. There was one for De Montagne about the station development on the REM system at the one end of the De Montagne line. And so there was some public information session. So usually it's good to go through that official channel. Having said that, usually the answers that you will be given from those um, PR offices, usually they are close to the level of information you're going to be able to find on their website. Like they're not going to tell you off the record things or answer complex questions. And the people employed in those offices are usually people, they're not often transport specialists. They're actually usually like at university, they've studied communications or something, and they just happen to be in the REM office. But their training is more just in the public communications side rather than the aspects of the project. But also there's been this ARTM planning process going on. So there are opportunities through that to um, attend public information sessions
Mhm.
and to get information. In general, it's good to collect as much information as you can get from those open sources so that if you really have questions that someone intimately involved in the project could answer, you can ask them those special questions rather than like, how long is the system or how many stations are there? Well, you can find that out by just looking at the website, or even the cost information it's all there in the FAQs on the website. So it's good to make sure that your question isn't answered in the FAQs
Okay.
before going and contacting someone um, about some specific aspect. But often when these projects are underway too, there's a level of secrecy around them. Um, so it's not completely they're not completely transparent with the information because some of it's commercially sensitive or politically sensitive. So they're not going to give you answers to many of those questions.
And this links to my next question. This week, two architectural firms actually quit the project. This was reported in the Gazette. And which two firms, it hasn't been made official yet, but they quit the project because of what's happening between Notre Dame and René-Lévesque, where the REM line is to be built above ground, and this is particularly for the second phase of the project. And they quit because they think it's poor visual appeal. And I just wanted to know what your thoughts are on this, like the fact that two firms quit the project because of poor design.
I did not know this in news. It's I've been following the news a bit. I mean, what you're talking about is this second phase of the REM. So there's this massive project underway that's under construction. There's then actually it's really just a proposal now for um, a second phase of the project, and I guess it's in the early design or discussion phase. And yes, some people have objected to the elevated alignment into the downtown core. I know that the mayor actually
Yeah.
has come out against it, and so it sounds like um, some other parties involved are actually expressing their objections to it. I think at this point the project is really in the discussion stages, and maybe these are kind of maybe these actions are being taken to try and encourage decision makers to change the project so that it would go underground rather than above ground. And these kind of conflicts are actually they're pretty common in these big projects where there's like some serious conflict over the alignment that it takes, like which route it takes, or whether it's elevated underground, or even what type of transit vehicles or what type of railway cars use the project. So yeah, I'm not surprised. Um, but it does it's good that people are drawing attention to the proposed design of this project in its early discussion phase, and bringing it to the public's attention that there might be things that are problematic about it.
Yeah, and before we move on to the next question, Anne-Marie, Aaron, can you guys test the raise hand feature? So I don't want to miss out whether Anne-Marie or Aaron have to say something or follow up so we can go in a good orderly fashion. Can you guys test it and let me know when you've tried it? Okay,
My
I
hand
see
is
Anne-Marie
raised right
has
now.
perfect
Raised.
two participants. Okay, just to make sure for the next question so we have a good flow going to it. Okay, so the third question. Okay, what do you think about the newly announced second line for the REM?
I don't know much about it. It sounds interesting. It's it would significantly increase the size of this new system that's under construction. I feel like it's maybe a little bit premature just because the first phase project, which is massive, is underway and is facing some difficulties um, in terms of the budget, in terms of complications to do with its construction. But it is good that longer term projects are being considered at this point. One thing I would say about it is it's the this proposal came from the office or from the government of Quebec. It actually came from politicians, and interestingly, the REM also the first phase of the REM, which I'll call the REM. Uh, this project also kind of came not out of some transport planning process, but actually was proposed by by politicians and was kind of put together ad hoc. So, and then um, the proposed project kind of took shape and was planned as it was being done, but it actually didn't result. It didn't um, result from a transport planning process that where you kind of sat down and looked at all the options on the table and different project proposals and considered things. So it is a little bit kind of anti-planning the way that it's been proposed. And in fact, the REM, the trend, this one to the east, this new phase is similar. It's really come from I think from the office of the Premier of Quebec, the Premier Ministre um, office. So it's in a way I support public transit infrastructure, and I'm kind of happy that these things are taking shape. But the way that they are taking shape is also it's a little bit anti-planning. So I'm a little bit concerned. And like the ARTM is doing the first phase of the REM, the part that's under construction now. It was done it was basically underway. And then the ARTM said, now we're going to plan for public transit while this project's underway. So then they're doing the plan, and then they're not even finished the plan yet. And now a new project was introduced, which they haven't considered. Um, so now they've had to like suspend or delay their planning. I don't know what's going on because basically the politicians are not following the plans. They're proposing kind of ad hoc these different projects. But it seems to be part of the political landscape in Quebec that different politicians, they come to office, they propose a project, and they don't really, um, tend to propose something new that wasn't proposed before. So then you have these different competing projects, and it's not clear which ones will get done. One thing I would say is that the first phase of the REM, the part that's under construction now, was initiated under the Liberal government of, I've forgotten the premier's name at the time, but Couillard. And then actually the project has been like fully supported, and there's no question of stopping now, but there was a change of government, and then they are in a sense proposing extensions to that. And now they've introduced like another project which would build upon it. So that there is some continuity there, in spite of the fact that it's more individual politicians which are announcing these. But then the mayor of Montreal also, she announced like a project which also came out of nowhere for a new metro line called the Pink Line. And then so like there's a huge number of proposals out there. At one point 10 years ago, there were a lot of proposals for tramways or for street railways in Montreal. And in fact, that's, if you look at the City of Montreal's transport plan from 2008, it was like at the top of the list. This is our priority, but it hasn't been built. So it's interesting that what's actually being done doesn't make much reference to the plans.
Oh, and Aaron, you had your hand raised. Please go ahead.
Yeah, so it's interesting. It's definitely a political project, and you see like where the politicians are getting involved and where they're announcing the funding tends to be where their where their votership actually comes from. Like if you look at the first phase of the REM, a big part of the project is the West Island, and if you look historically, it's been a liberal voting federally and provincially, and like you could argue municipally too. And then if you look at the REM de l'Est, which has been proposed by the CAC government right now, the CAQ government has majority of their numbers in Montreal's East End. And then if you look at the Pink Line that Valerie Plante proposed, the majority of Projet Montréal was in the plateau, in the area where the Pink Line was going to go through. So it's really interesting to see how that voter turnout influences where or what projects actually get proposed. Is it what the city needs? That's a whole other argument, but it's interesting to see that connection.
Yeah, it's fascinating. Yeah, it is clear that the location of these projects does follow where there's political support for political parties, which makes sense. Political parties are seeking to do things that are supported by the people that vote for them, their electoral base. If politicians totally disregarded the wishes or the desires of their constituents in those places, they would lose support. So they do have to make decisions that are in line with the priorities of the people who voted for them. I think also sometimes they're also trying to shore up support sometimes in places where actually it could go either way. So they're actually trying to make proposals to in places where the election is up for grabs, and then by them making a proposal. I'm thinking of the South Shore and like Montaigne, like these areas could go different ways in provincial elections. So I can also see that they might be trying to shore up support or to generate support for them by proposing them out there. I don't know enough about the political landscape of Montreal to know exactly how the people vote toward the east end of Montreal, but maybe some of those are up for grabs as well. And that is the current government trying to propose something as they look toward their next election and trying to generate votes.
And just to continue on, sir, we are at the 45-minute mark. Would you like to continue, sir? Are you available for another maybe 15-20 minutes? Hopefully we should have all our questions underway. Now, this is an interesting one and something that I would want to add on after, because I had some thoughts regarding when you mentioned the South Shore. Where do you think there will be the most gentrification caused by the REM? What are some potential solutions to mitigate these concerns?
That's a good question. I don't have a quick answer to it.
Yeah.
But the land and real estate values should go up around the stations. So if we look at where those stations are located, we will then see places. So gentrification is sometimes used really broadly to refer to any situation in which housing prices are going up. Um, but if we think about it also in terms of it has to do with uh, socioeconomic change in places that are currently low socioeconomic status or low income, and being transformed into places that are high socioeconomic status and high income. So then if you wanted to know the places where the REM could contribute to a gentrification process, you would need to identify those places that are currently considered low income or low socioeconomic
Mhm.
status. So a lot of the REM is actually going to places though that are relatively affluent toward
Yes.
the West Highland and Montreal. So I don't know that there are a lot of places that are actually low income around those stations. But if that would be a great GIS project to do, would be to map the census tracts with so, low socioeconomic status or low income, according to some measures from the census, and then identify those census tracts. I've seen other maps of gentrification that do that. So you could take that and then see which of those census tracts are kind of within the catchment area where we would see um, where we would see an effect attributed to a REM station, which would probably be like, within roughly a 1 kilometer radius of those stations, we would expect to see the effect. So then you could map out where those places would be. That would be a great project. I suspect there aren't a lot that would actually, but I think more broadly, when some people talk about gentrification, they might just be talking about rising real estate values and rising housing prices. And then if you were to use that much broader definition of gentrification, then you'd probably say, no, there are actually many places on this network where there will be um, higher housing costs.
This is this was an amazing response, and I have a few things to add to it, but I'm gonna let Aaron speak since he has his hand raised, and then I will speak depending if Anne Marie has to say anything right after her. Go ahead, Aaron.
Yeah, so
Please.
one of my colleagues within the department is actually looking at the impacts of not the REM specifically, but looking at the impacts on the PNUF BRT. And he's doing that kind of equity analysis and looking at where the low income neighborhoods are and how they could potentially be affected. I haven't seen the results for that, but I'm looking forward to reading that when it comes out. But I think that's a step in the right direction, because once you have it for a line, you could apply it to another region in the area, particularly along the REM and that catchment area. So it's pretty cool to look at for sure.
Yeah, I think this newer proposed line to the east would actually probably go into more low income census tracts. So the potential is probably more there for this new proposal, as well as for the blue line extension, which is a project which has been ongoing for a long period of time, but which is slowly moving ahead, which definitely goes into low income neighborhoods. Although that project's been underway for so long, some people make the argument that these effects on housing prices and land prices from building like metro stations or REM light rail stations or whatever, some people argue that those price effects actually happen as soon as it's announced and people believe that it's going to happen. So people have believed for so long that the blue line extension is happening that it is likely that those price effects probably already are being reflected in the real estate prices, even though it's
Yep.
not yet there. And similarly with the REM. So occasionally people ask me, should I go and buy like a condo on the REM system now? Um,
Oof,
might be a
yeah.
good investment, but the the kind of windfall that you might get before other people have heard about it, it's probably already gone. Like people are already taking that um, price effect into account when they're buying and selling around those stations. They're probably treating it as though it actually exists. I'd say the PNUF BRT is more of a wild card because we don't have much BRT in Canada, and the relationship between real estate values and the public transport infrastructure, it's kind of complicated, but it's generally positive. But then it's a little bit offset by negative effects like noise from a train going by. So there's a little bit of a negative effect. And then there's the positive effect of enhanced accessibility around those stations. With the BRT, if it's using diesel buses, the negative effects can be quite substantial, and the noise effects along the system. And people are probably less sure that it will happen and less sure that it will always be there in comparison to a metro station or like a SkyTrain or and a light rail station, which is so permanent that you know it's going to be there long term, whereas the busway could change. And so it's hard to know. It's an interesting topic for research.
I love this topic. Anne-Marie, please go ahead. You have your hand raised.
Yeah, definitely. I was going to go on the housing gentrification topic. My friend's parents recently sold their house. They lived on the North Shore, and they were actually looking to buy an apartment, and they were thinking of the outskirts of Montreal, even Laval, and something close to the future site of the REM. And by the time they sold their house, they ended up buying an apartment in Montreal because the prices had been raised in Bois-Franc and in Laval as well. So I'm guessing that's already happening, and that was a little bit more than a year ago.
Yeah, I think it's by now already the construction is so far underway. We don't know if it's going to take 2 more years or 4 more years to build, but we know that with relatively soon, there's going to be a system operating and stations open in those places. So I think people are fully taking into account now.
Yeah.
Definitely.
And I think just one thing I'd want to contribute to this, sir, especially with your point about the REM system being built in affluent areas. Now, for example, here I'll give some context in Brossard, what's going on here. It's actually near Distrant, the REM. Yes, it's near Distrant, behind the Cineplex, which is nearby the C section of Brossard, which is a housing area. And what I've noticed there is up to 3 condominium buildings have been built alongside the REM station. And I think a 4th and 5th one is being developed now. Based on what I've seen, I've gone on site quite a few times during the summer and the months leading up to it, taken a few pictures. I've observed the area, and I know for a fact that these condos were going for an extremely high price. And now there's construction going along Panama, which is another station that is being prepared for the REM. And that's where I see issues of gentrification coming in, because the sections there, the housing nearby Panama is significantly, apparently the values are going up right now. And yes, it's a huge, I feel like it is a good, it contributes well to the housing prices going up. But then I've noticed even before construction of the REM and that infrastructure affecting housing prices, people within these areas, especially in Brossard now, I'm seeing this huge distinct housing styles now. Modern homes coming into the picture now, and they're being mixed in with traditional style homes. And what's interesting about this is converting from traditional to modern. It's not all that difficult. You can actually do it with a few simple renovations on the exterior and interior, which increases the value up. And when you have a few of these homes being transformed, then it increases the value of the area itself. So I feel like that would be an interesting study point. Just one thing I wanted to add into the conversation.
Yeah.
And yeah, so we'll go on to the next question. What do you think is the future of the city center REM stations, since a great number of articles are talking about the future of employment being at a distance? How will this be facilitated due to COVID-19?
So by central stations, you mean like the McGill station, the station? So there will be a REM station. I guess it's at the central train station at Bonaventure.
Yes, sir.
And then one at McGill College, and then I guess there's one in Griffintown.
Yeah, And Edward Montpetit, because some people consider
Okay,
it
yeah,
the
on the
center of
other
the
side of
city.
the mountain by University
Yeah.
of Montreal. So there's kind of 4 city stations on the system. So how will the effects of COVID, the pandemic, and the office market relate to this? It's a good question. I don't know the answer. No one knows the answer. We can guess. I'm still relatively optimistic that there will be a bounce back in terms of the office market. And I've heard some evidence for that, but I've also heard case being made that really the office market is really going to drop in the central area because so many people are going to maintain working maybe a couple days a week. So then you really don't need as much. You can rotate people in the offices, and you really don't need as much space. So I think we won't know until it happens. I think we're all coming to grips with the fact that this is going to the effects of COVID itself, which is still going on, the pandemic, and then the after effects are going to go on for years. So I I I, I think that there's a lot of uncertainty. I'm quite optimistic that within years there will be the new station will open at McGill College, and this will really these stations in the central area will really become higher accessibility locations within the region, and I think it would reinforce their locational advantages. Whether or not there's the demand for office space in those locations or like shopping centers in those locations is a big question, and we won't know. And yeah, I mean, how is this going to affect the REM's projections? And the financing model for the REM is dependent on partly on fare revenue. And then, yeah, it's this complicated arrangement where the, the municipalities are going to provide uh, payments to the REM basically, and then the REM will charge fares, and then their revenues will be a combination of those payments from the municipality and the fare revenue they take in. But if the ridership ends up being substantially lower than was projected, the financial viability of this project as it's currently structured is kind of up in the air. So there's a lot of uncertainty. I guess that's how I would answer. There's a lot of uncertainty, but if things go well, it is possible to think that those downtown stations will open in a few years, and we'll be getting fully recovered from COVID in a few years, and that would be
Fingers
good time
crossed.
actually. So it could actually work well too. There could be like an economic bounce back and some kind of post-COVID boom, and just as those stations come online. That's the optimist in me speaking.
Aaron, you have your hand raised. Please
Yeah,
go ahead.
I definitely like that optimistic approach because we need it every once in a while. Now, right now, there's like a whole consultation underway with the fares in the Montreal area and like how it links to the STM fares. What do you see happening in this scenario? Like, do you see this conversation being changed by COVID? And I guess like a follow-up question would be, um, is there a way we could use the fares to incentivize people to actually use transit? Like in Vancouver with UBC, they actually provide transit for free for students. So is that something that could potentially bring people back if you provide these discounted, or would it alter the financing of the project?
Yeah, I think these are big questions. I think that if transit ridership remains weak, there will be pressure not to raise fares or to lower fares. And then at the same time, um, the finances of the STM and then of the CDPQ infra, which is going to be running the REM system, their finances will be dependent on the fares. So it'll be pulling in 2 directions. Um, but yeah, at some point there might be need to be some consideration of lowering fares or not raising fares. But then at the same time, they're going to have to increase their revenues. So I don't know how this is going to work out. And actually, it's not clear to me, and I don't think anyone quite knows yet what the REM fares are going to be like. But the financing arrangements of the REM are based on payments that are in line with the amounts charged for the commuter rail system now, which are actually relatively high fares. So they have been planning for a relatively high fare system, and I don't know how this is going to play out, or what kind of arrangement will be made with the STM. Like, do you buy one pass for both systems, and can you transfer, or do you have to pay? And I think it's been left rather late to work out these details, but they will have to be worked out pretty soon, because it's opening. The first section should open in a couple of years, I believe.
Yeah, and now to our next question. So our second last question. Actually, I think this would be our second last question. Do you think this could be developed into or encourage long distance network with other cities? If successful, do you think it could go to that state, go to that level?
You mean the REM infrastructure could be actually go, say, to Ottawa or something?
Yeah, expanded into.
I don't think it's that type of technology that's designed for those much longer distances. So my quick answer to that would be no. That for intercity travel, we would need to upgrade the Via Rail, system that's currently in operation, and you know, possibly electrify those train lines, which would be huge, or significantly upgrade the track so that they can travel at higher speeds. But I do not believe that this kind of metro style of infrastructure, I believe, is just too costly to justify building huge long stretches of it.
Yeah, Aaron, you have your hand raised. Please go
Yeah,
ahead.
and I'm also thinking, like, right now it's like elevated for the majority of it. I can
Yeah.
just imagine driving from Montreal to Toronto and you see this elevated train track and you're like, this is so ugly to look at. So I don't like, if it could be built it won't be built underground for that long of distance. It could be built ground level, but I still just like laugh thinking about how it could be an elevated structure from here to Ottawa and just ruin the natural landscape. Like they've already been complaining about how it ruined the natural landscape along the Lachine Canal. So,
But if you're traveling through open space or through relatively unpopulated space, you normally don't elevate the structure, because that roughly doubles the cost. So you would just run it on the ground level, wherever possible. That's the cheapest thing. But then you have to put fencing along it so that no one can get onto the tracks or into that right of way. So that would be possible. Having said that, I rode on Japan's Shinkansen, their fast trains, a couple of years ago, and I was surprised that there were elevated stretches in various places through the countryside or through like small towns. So yeah, it can end up looking like this huge concrete structure.
Yeah, Anne-Marie, you have your hand raised, please.
Yeah, definitely. As the author of that question, I was actually thinking of Japan, and I have read articles about like the connection between Montreal, Quebec City, and Toronto. And maybe that form of the REM is not possible, like you said, and maybe a concrete elevated railway is also not a great option for Canada. But I was thinking maybe we could import some sort of the Japanese technology here, and maybe the REM would give a taste for that and give interest to that, and maybe open some sort of conversation.
Yep. Yeah, it does. It's a new public transport technology that's being introduced to Montreal for the first time. It's automated trains with overhead wires that will be running mainly elevated, but underground in the downtown. So yeah, it will demonstrate some other possibilities and will gives us more things to talk about. As for these intercity, like Quebec City, Montreal, or Montreal, Ottawa, or Montreal, Ottawa, Toronto, these have been considered now for high-speed rail, and I know there is some discussion going on at Infrastructure Canada in Ottawa and other places about in the post-COVID era, should we be looking at advancing those kind of high-speed rail projects between cities, and what kind of expense would be involved, what kind of investment would be involved, what kind of technology should be involved. Um, and these are going to be big questions for the coming decades. If we're going to reduce greenhouse gas emissions significantly, one way of doing it is partly to reduce the use of cars and airplanes as well. So building high-speed rail in this most densely populated corridor of Canada is the prime place to do it. So if it is something that we're going to do, we need to look at it, start looking at it soon. Yeah.
Of course. And I guess one final comment that I'll make regarding this question is I just think there's a lot of, I don't want to say problems because it hasn't obviously fully released yet, but I feel like there's a lot of issues going ahead towards the plans, like a lot of things that aren't clear yet. And there are a lot of sides to this that are for the REM, that are against the REM. And I feel like all these logistics have to be figured out before thinking bigger. I love thinking big. I love thinking in the long term. I love thinking about how it can have, how multiple cities can be impacted by technology, whether it be from other sources or transportation itself. Hopefully, we can have some more clarity on the project in the coming future. And yeah, this goes on to the last question, sir. So we finally made it. How will this, and this is from Anne-Marie again, how will this impact other modes of transportation, the ones that we have currently? Do you think?
We talked about long-term, like long-range travel, but what about short-range travel?
Exactly.
Like, how would the REM affect travel within Greater Montreal? Is that the question?
Yeah.
Yes.
Well, I mean, the hope is that it's going to increase public transport capacity, and that people that were previously making trips by car will shift to making those trips by REM, by this new mode. So that's the hope. And then if there's transit-oriented development around that system, and people walk or bicycle to stations, and there's transit-oriented development, this could be part of a shift toward more public transport use. So that's part of why we're building it, is the hope that it is going to shift mode share toward public transport or more sustainable and less oil consuming modes of transportation. The degree to what the degree to, or how much of that takes place, will partly depend on the land use patterns. So if there is substantial development around new development at higher medium or high densities around transit, this could result in higher levels of use of that infrastructure and less new car-oriented suburbs. So this is part of the hope of this new infrastructure, is that it will lead to land use changes as well, which will support more use of transit, less use of cars.
Great. I think sir, that was our last question. I don't think there's any other follow-ups or comments that need to be made. So I just really wanted to take this time and say thank you for taking this much time. I know we went over the 45 minutes. I sort of expected 45 minutes to be a bit, especially with the amount of questions that we had and the amount of details that we went into. I'm glad you could stick around and give us this much time. We highly appreciate it, and we know students will be loving this episode. If any student has any comments or questions for Craig, for Dr. Craig Townsend, please list them below on the Facebook page, on the YouTube comments. We will try and address those questions to him in the future. And Aaron, Anne-Marie, thank you so much for being the panelist for today. I enjoyed being moderator. This was my first time being a moderator in a discussion. So any last comments, Anne-Marie, Aaron, you want to make anything towards Dr. Townsend?
Thank you, Craig, for
Thank
taking
you so
time
much.
over your March break and over our reading week to do this. I've been looking forward to it for a while. It's always neat to be talking about transportation projects in Montreal and how there's so much uncertainty, but somehow we could demystify what's happening and explain some of it.
Yeah, no, it's been my pleasure talking to you. And as I think you can tell, I like talking about these things. So
I love it.
I've enjoyed it.